Morning, everyone. Well, I say morning, it's morning for me. Hello to wherever you are in the world. I'm just going to wait a few minutes to let everyone join. So please bear with me and I'll introduce myself shortly. But I think given that there's quite a lot of attendees, I'm going to take a minute just to let everyone join. So I'll back with you shortly. Again, hello to those who have just joined. I can see the numbers are creeping up. So I will introduce myself shortly. I'm just going to give it another few seconds because I can still see people joining and I hope you can see me okay. It does look a bit dark for me. I'm battling with the sunshine, which is a nice problem to have. It just means it looks like I'm in a darkened room, but it's quite the opposite. I'm enjoying the last rays of Oxford sunshine. It is sunny in Oxford sometimes, I do promise you. And also just to say, please do use the Q&A function if you do want to ask anything. There's going to be lots of time at the end for questions, and I'll clarify the format shortly. But in the meantime, Q&A is open. Feel free to drop anything in there during the presentation as well, and then I'll come to them at the end. Numbers are still going up, which is awesome. Once they start slowing, I'll get going. Okay. Looks like numbers are slowing. So I think I will get going. So without further ado, yeah, good morning from Oxford. It's Tom Lawrence here from the Career Development Centre. So I've got an hour with you this morning, which is a nice amount of time. I've got a few things to share with you, but the idea is as well just to open the floor for any questions that you might have. So don't worry, there will be plenty of time. I plan to use about 30 minutes to run through a few kind of headline messages about what we do and how we support you throughout the full journey of your Oxford MBA, just so that everyone gets a sense of kind of how we help with career transitions, and then it's open to questions. So I think without further ado, I'll just say a quick bit about myself. So as you can see, I am Tom Lawrence. I'm the head of global industries within the Career Development Centre. And that's probably not going to mean much to many of you. Global industries is basically our way of having a catch-all for any sector that isn't finance or consulting. So my team has the lovely job really of the very broad space that encompasses tech, healthcare, FMCG, you name it. If it isn't finance or consulting, then it's my team. And just while I keep an eye on the Q&A, I'll keep checking back to see if there's any topics that don't get covered. So well done to Sahil for dropping in a note there. Thank you. Please do keep that open, guys, and drop anything if I don't cover it. I will come to social impact careers. That is within global industries as well. And I'll talk about how we're set up to support that. So I've been at the school for 3 years, pretty much to the day. I joined straight from Amazon, where I used to run the campus recruitment for Amazon across Europe. So I essentially switched to the other side 3 years ago, kind of poacher turned gamekeeper in a kind of way. And it's just wonderful to be at Oxford helping students with their career transition, having made a few career transitions myself. I think I'm on to my 6th definitive career spanning 25 years of working. May not look like it, but I promise I have been working for a quarter of a century, which makes me feel very tired as well as very old. Essentially, I've switched a few times to kind of follow my heart, but also when I've worked out what I'm good at, I've gradually then been able to create a career narrative that helps me feel challenged. It's helped me grow. It's helped me do what I'm passionate about, which is ultimately helping people with their own career. So before running recruitment at Amazon, I essentially had a varied career in spanning events, journalism, then into the startup world, and then into digital marketing with Amazon, before I then switched into recruitment. And that's what ultimately led me to Saïd Business School, where I used to come here as essentially as their biggest recruiter, bring in this big machine, hiring MBAs, and sweeping in and sweeping out. And now, obviously, I'm on the other side, leading the team that we call Global Industries, helping MBA students figure out what they want to do, but also kind of provide the tools and resources that helps them forge their own career long-term as well. So that's me in a nutshell. If you could move to the next slide, please, Megan, that'd be great. Got basically a couple of slides just to go through. Thank you. So ultimately, when it comes to the Career Development Centre, this is really how we think about career transitions in a nutshell. So I'll let you take a moment to take in the images here. They're a little bit obvious, so bear with me. Obviously, a lot of MBAs in an ideal world would like to think that you have a nice clear plan for a career transition. You come in, you do your MBA, you get the job, and off you go. Obviously, the reality along the way is that there's going to be twists and turns. There's going to be challenges. There's going to be laughter. There's going to be tears. It's not going to be straightforward. And what we try to do with supporting students on that varied path is really have an awareness of the different things that they can do to help that career transition go as smoothly and as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So what we try to do is get our students to think about kind of the differences between what they need to be aware of, what they can influence, and what they can control. And just maybe to bring that to life for you in kind of career and MBA transition terms, if you were to think of, you can be aware that a target firm of yours, a target organization, fewer MBAs year on year within the last 12 months. But obviously you can't control that. But what you can control is how prepared you are going into any kind of assessment process, application process, and you can influence how much time and what kind of network you can build to help you with that journey along the way. So I think that basically what we see is the people who are a bit more aware about what's in their control tend to have a smoother career transition. And obviously there's things you can let go where for example, a company isn't hiring MBAs. That's not something you can change, but you then instead spend your energy on building your network and working out what is more feasible for you. So I hope that makes sense. If we can move to the next slide, please. Now the good news is, whilst it is a varied journey, and again, excuse the kind of obvious message and cheesy pick, but what we do genuinely see, especially in this kind of digital COVID world, is that honestly, together as a cohort, students are stronger, especially when it comes to career transitions. And what we mean by that is, when you're thinking about what you need to be aware of, what you can influence and what you can control, your network and your peers are hugely influential in this process. And you can influence who you kind of add to your network, who you support, and who you get support from. And time again, you have such a diverse cohort at Oxford every year. It's incredible that actually there's so many people from varied backgrounds that someone out there can help you. And it's not always just one person either. So a lot of what we do encourages networking and leveraging not only your current class, but the rich alumni pool that goes back years and is vast and covers so many sectors. There are people out there with a connection to Saïd Business School who can help and influence your own career transition. So a lot of what I'll talk about later on kind of encompasses the value of networks. Okay, so if we can move to the next slide, please. Just a quick question really to put out. There's no right or wrong answer here, but you can use the Q&A function, or ideally, or the chat if you've got it there. But I just want to get a sense from the audience really, what you think a typical MBA career transition would look like in terms of time. How long do you think it will take you to pivot your career as part of doing an MBA? I'm just going to check the chat board and Q&A to see what we're getting in. Thank you to those who are putting some in. That's brilliant to see. And I'm getting some really interesting answers here. So I'm getting essentially anywhere between a year to 3 years. And ultimately, that's broadly correct. There isn't necessarily a specific number we would put to it, but it is more than a year, and that's what I want to emphasize. So I'm really pleased that already people are recognizing it's not a case of joining, doing the MBA and pivoting. Actually, there's a lot of time either side, ultimately, that's part of the career transition as well. I mean, typically we see it as around about a 20-month journey ourselves in terms of just an average, and obviously that's not necessarily accurate. We don't have specific inputs to measure that because it's a bit more complicated than that. But ultimately, we think of it around 20 months so that we're supporting Oxford MBAs before they start their MBA, obviously during and then afterwards as well. In fact, we're kind of into the busiest period for the graduating MBA class who've just hit capstone and finished their MBA. And actually now is a very vibrant period for them where they've got a bit more time and they've obviously got their head around what their career journey might look like at the moment. And a lot of them are very active in the job market. Plus, obviously, we've got the new MBA cohort that started just yesterday. So it's a very interesting time of year for us. But ultimately, it never stops really. And what we try to do is get people aware that there are things that they can influence and can control before they start their MBA. So as and when you join Oxford, you would be essentially provided with some very clear guidance and support of the summer before the MBA starts. Obviously, that would be next summer. And then we've got some slides in a bit for me to show you about what support looks like during the MBA as well. And then obviously afterwards, knowing that it's a long journey. So that's it on timelines. Thank you for your input on that. Hopefully that makes sense. If we can move to the next slide, please, Megan. Thank you. So a bit more about how we're set up, and hopefully this will answer some of the questions that are coming in around the different careers. So you can see here the 4 blue circles on the left. This is how we've set up our teams within the Career Development Centre. And you'll see very deliberately that social impact is at the heart of everything we do, and at the heart of the 3 main teams that we have. So I'll talk more about how those teams are set up in a few slides, but ultimately we have 3 main teams: finance, consulting, and global industry, which I head up. But behind all of that, social impact careers touch on all of those elements. So for example, impact investing requires many skills and networks that align with traditional investment worlds. So the finance careers team support impact investing. Similarly, with impact consulting, there's a lot of similarity with the skills required and the preparation that students can do if they want to move into impact consulting as they would do MBB, for example. So again, the consulting team with the expertise that they've got support students who are interested in impact consulting. And then within my team, I've got a dedicated headcount who focuses on then everything else within impact. So that's NGOs, foundations, charities, CSR type roles at multinational organizations. It's a very broad space, and obviously it aligns with the school values. So we're set up to support that accordingly. We kind of love the diversity that we get in each MBA class, and our team is kind of set up similarly to embrace that and support all those very different career journeys along the way. Now, I will also talk about what that support looks like specifically, but before I move on from this slide, you'll see on the right that there's a lot of common ground when it comes to career development support. And this is sector agnostic. You know, how we see support are things like the employer events that will take place throughout the MBA. There's obviously some of the more practical support around interview preparation and CV and application support. One-to-one coaching, obviously, we're set up to do. And then we also leverage, as well as alumni, we have a broad pool of what we call industry advisors, who are basically experts in specific sectors, people with extensive careers in a specific pool. And what we do is we use them to have coaching sessions with students where there's a very clear need, you know, and a specific sector identified on the student side. We kind of utilize the wider resources that the school has to help students understand the various spaces as well. And that's us in a nutshell. I know that as you move through the process, you will get the opportunity to find out a bit more, but hopefully that gives you a flavor at least of how we're set up and how we support students. If we could move to the next slide. And yeah, this is kind of the 20-month, whatever you want to call it, a year, 20-month, 2-year journey. We kind of have identified essentially a learning path that typically follows these steps, and we've designed the learning journey around that. So for us, as I mentioned before, once someone is signed up and ready to start their MBA next September, the work starts in the summer, where we've developed an online careers academy, which is bespoke to us, and it's very much tailored around recognizing the work that students can be doing to be effective before they then start their MBA. Excuse me, and this goes back to you know, leveraging the time that you've got over the summer to then be able to, you know, embrace the Oxford experience once you start. So we have that very much in mind when it comes to the Careers Academy. It's all about foundational work that sets you up well to jump in and embrace the MBA once it starts. Then obviously, as we started yesterday with the new class, launch is a very specific period right at the start of the MBA that then essentially recognizes that students have had the summer, they've been working on some of the basics, and now we get into, well, okay, this is to help you get an understanding of what the landscape looks like, how everything fits in with the MBA, and all comes together. So we have a dedicated 2 weeks that is fully integrated with careers that then helps students get up to speed really quickly, recognizing that employers start looking to hire our students very soon. Then during the course of the MBA, a number of programs kick in throughout the year. And this is why it spans such a long time, because there's a lot to pack in. So to bring that to life, for example, the co-curricular stuff in the blue box on the right-hand side, you'll see there's a number of very specific and dedicated kind of career angles that are factored in. And this goes across the wider school as well. So you'll probably, if you haven't already, hear a bit more about the School Centre for Entrepreneurship, for example. And we work directly with them to build out kind of joined efforts and activities for those who are looking to be an entrepreneur in the impact space, for example. So we're not duplicating anything and kind of being aware of where the specialism lies. And another example, which I can talk to a bit more when it comes to global industries, is the data analytics and digital marketing pathway, which is a bit of a mouthful, so we call it DADMAP. But ultimately that is about recognizing that many employers want data savvy hires, data savvy MBAs. So we lay on a number of very specific skills workshops that kind of feed off the MBA and some of the theory and strategy that you learn, and give you kind of essentially hard skills that you can add to your CV and that we see on many job descriptions in the employment market. And that then leads us into the capstone program, which has just kicked in for the students who've just graduated. And that is essentially a continuation of career support, recognizing that many students are just starting their career journey, having focused on their MBA. And we kind of build our support around that as well. So we have a number of group sessions, one-to-one sessions, and kind of specialist workshops that essentially are designed around MBAs hitting the job market ready to go, essentially. So that kind of is a bit different to the longer term stuff and the soft skills that are woven into the course of the MBA earlier on. So that's the kind of journey we take you on ultimately. And I'll happily take any questions on that when we get to the end. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So essentially, we're just going to finish with a quick, really run through of the 3/4 main sectors that we cover, or the teams that are within career development. So obviously, I've talked about global industry a little bit already, so I'm not going to read through this slide word for word. Essentially, in our space, we recognize because we're so broad, it's really important to be kind of aware of the many different paths that people can take. And there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to this, because obviously, as you can imagine, with 300 plus very diverse people in each class, all looking to do something different, especially if it's not finance or consulting, then actually it's really hard to be able to build out programs that cover everything that anyone could possibly need. So instead, we kind of go back to basics and leverage all of the different resources around us. So part of that includes building out, say, the product management roadmap, where, for example, we recognize that that's a function that spans many different sectors, and it's growing in interest from MBAs, and there are lots of product management roles out there. So we're building essentially a really, really active community in that space of SBS alumni who have moved into that function across many different sectors and are sharing their insights and helping new MBAs understand that role and work out whether it's something they want to do and how they can get there. So global industry, as I said, it's very broad. Ultimately, when it comes to thinking about a career transition in the global industry space, we boil it down to those 3 key areas to focus on. So our support is designed around helping you be clear about what your career journey might look like, how you can best prepare for that, and the importance of networking. And that's global industry in a nutshell. So we can move on to the next slide. Then obviously our finance team are set up around the world of financial services. So again, I'm not going to read this word for word. You'll see some similarities with the different teams in that we recognize within those sectors there are specific programs that are specialist for those sectors and are designed accordingly. So that's with the recruitment market in mind. That's with the expertise that we have within the network. So dedicated programs such as the Finance Lab, which is a huge part of the MBA and very much integrated for those who want to get into it. And that fits in alongside of the academic content, but it's also got a careers angle very much with the tangible outcomes in mind. But again, with finance, you'll see it can be broad. So the way to think of it is that there is structured hiring, typically earlier in the MBA itself, often in Michaelmas term. But actually the majority of people will move in what's called off-cycle hiring, where it's essentially about identifying an organization and a role, applying for it directly and getting the support to help you get through that process. And that's finance in a nutshell. So we can move on. Similarly, with our consulting careers team, that's built around essentially those 4 different types of consulting that you can see on the left-hand side there. So again, that we're kind of building teams and support around our knowledge of those sectors. So what I didn't mention for finance is that the head of finance essentially used to be in that industry, used to work on the trading floor. His name is John Madgwick, and he's bringing a lot of industry experience, kind of like I've got from obviously the tech world and the general broader commercial space. And then similarly for consulting, the head of consulting careers was a consultant herself, and is bringing that industry experience to the role. So then that team has built out the consulting development program, which is, as you can see, very broad and extensive in terms of the type of support that it covers. And ultimately that's about being aware of how the different sectors work, and helping students be conscious about what they can influence, what they can control within that space. That's consulting in a nutshell, so we can move on. And ultimately then, it's just a final reminder for me, going back to an earlier slide, that whenever, regardless of which sector you're looking to go into, and I can't emphasize this enough, and we're seeing this play out at the moment in this current world, is that actually it's the network that's going to help you the most with your career transition. So I'm not standing here saying the Career Development Centre is the answer and will do everything for you and you're going to get a great service. Actually, what we're going to do is give you the space and the awareness to understand how your network, how you can use networking to great effect to forge your own very unique career, which won't be straightforward. And it's only through working with your network that you will be able to do that well. So that, I think, is the last slide. Just if you can move to the final one. Yeah, that brings us nicely to questions. And I promised to take about half an hour, and would you look at it? I've done as I promised. We've got a good chunk of time for questions. So if it's all right with you, I'm going to take a sip of water and look at the Q&A just to see what we've got in the chat box. So bear with me a second. Cool. Right, I just realized that it was a long time talking for me, so it was nice to take a breath. I'll just work through them in the order that I'm seeing them, and keep them coming because we've got plenty of time. So career path in social work organisations, yes. So I'm not going to get into the salaries they offer, and I'm not going to get really into too specific about what a career path would look like there, Sahil, ultimately because career paths can look very different in the social impact space. There isn't necessarily, I would say, a typical path or necessarily a typical salary. They vary, and it depends on the organisation. It depends on, I guess, what your motivations are with regards to that. So there are, I would say, typically the roles that might pay better would be the ones in the larger organisations that are for profit and ultimately have more competitive compensation strategies. So that might look like a sustainability role at Unilever, for example. But of course, there are many really inspiring roles at not-for-profit organisations that won't pay as well, but ultimately more rewarding in other ways. Ultimately, we've set our whole team around different careers. So ultimately, we would be helping you explore that and helping you have the awareness of the different resources and networks around the school. That, the School Centre, for example, have a wonderful impact network that we leverage, and we have a number of industry advisors who are specialists in the sector. So we have someone who's worked for the United Nations, for example, for many years and knows that space really well, who you would be able to talk to as part of exploring that career. So hopefully that answers, and I'm going to move on to the next question. A few examples of FMCG companies. So I would say, again, it's going to be broad and it will vary every year. But for example, in the class who've just graduated, we've had some really exciting roles get filled by Oxford MBA graduates in L'Oreal, in Coca-Cola, and again, this will vary each year. What I would say is don't get too drawn in on specific names at this stage. Certainly in our experience, we find that if you get too focused on one particular company at this early stage, you can risk essentially you know, not being as efficient in the longer term when we really encourage kind of a much broader awareness and priority ranking of different organizations so that in the long term you can build a broader network and have options. But ultimately, yes, FMCG organizations and others are still hiring MBAs. There's plenty of exciting jobs out there at the moment. Internships is a good question as well. So ultimately, there are internships. We've seen more than ever before for the current class who've just graduated. I guess that's probably a reflection of the full-time job market to an extent that has been a bit ambiguous and unsettled, obviously, for the last couple of months. And the school and the MBA are set up with internships very much in mind. So many students do an internship for credit, and that ultimately means they're doing a shorter term project for an organization, and it's set up so that actually it forms part of your MBA. But similarly, there are many people doing internships, short-term contracts, projects, whatever you want to call them, that aren't credited for the MBA for whatever reason, whether that's by choice or by not. And we're really flexible with that because we do recognize that, especially in this current market, people need to be flexible. And ultimately, if there's a great opportunity, we don't want people to feel like they can't take it because of whatever restrictions. So hopefully that covers to an extent internships, lots of options there. Does this flowchart relate to the MBA +1? Ginny, sort of. Yes, it does, in that the flowchart, the kind of the timeline of the career support talks to the MBA part of the 1+1, I guess. That's where we build our support around. But that's not to say we're not here when you're doing the other part of your 1+1. So there is a period where you're kind of supported by both teams, that when you're not doing your MBA and you're doing your master's in whatever, then you're also supported by university careers. And ultimately, when you do your MBA, that's when you're handed over, and the Career Development Centre within Saïd Business School supports you. And obviously, we focus on tangible job opportunities and transitions. So we put the focus on, if you're doing your MBA second, then the support times around you then transitioning into a full-time role and forging a long-term career. So that's how we think about it. Keep moving down the questions, bear with me. So, prospects for product management with no prior experience in the UK after the MBA. There are prospects, so we'll start on a positive there. I would say, especially in the tech market, as you rightly point out, Fateh, that ultimately, yes, tech organizations are certainly less hit in many places by COVID than other sectors for obvious reasons. And that therefore there are more opportunities, and we see more often than not, a lot of tech organizations are set up to sponsor visas as well, because obviously we're conscious that that's something with such a diverse cohort, something that's really important. And the role of product management is something that we see aligns well to an MBA. And certainly that's what I saw firsthand at Amazon before I moved across. I would say the majority of MBAs, certainly 3 years ago, 4 years ago, were moving into product management because a lot of what you learn in an MBA translates really well to the function of product management in terms of being able to think strategically, but being able to use data to drive decision-making, being able to influence effectively. A lot of these skills that we see make good product managers. So that's certainly a thriving space. And with good networking, a solid career plan that is utilizing all of the resources around them, that is a completely viable path for someone to come and get a job in product management in the UK post-MBA. Bear with me while I start read through. So hopefully I've covered social impact, but I will just touch on the terminology of a of a well-nurtured curriculum and career path. I guess, yes, we have that in mind in that a lot of, I guess, the activity is spread over the course of the year for allow to people to kind of forge their own path and kind of nurture their own activity and kind of hand pick different elements depending on what they want to do. So there's no kind of forcing of, well, if you haven't done this by this point, then you can't do anything else going forward. It's very much flexible regardless of sector here. So I guess the quick and high level answer here is that it's very much about a well-nurtured career path and being aware of the various resources that are available to you. And obviously with impact, it's a big part of the school and what we do. So for entrepreneurial outcomes, this is not covered by career development, but what I will say is that we have, I guess, a couple of more directly related teams that you will hopefully learn more about over the course of this process. And there's the Skoll Centre for Social Impact and Entrepreneurship. So the Entrepreneurship Centre ultimately is all about supporting students in their own venture, but we also have channels into the Foundry, which is the wider university's team and base for people setting up their own business as well. Career development doesn't get involved with entrepreneurial outcomes. We're focused on helping students ultimately, forge a career with an organization. I'm going to keep on going through. So Rossi, yeah, I like your question around thinking about which pathway and which sector consulting for non-profit sector. So I personally, I'm interpreting that as impact consulting, which ultimately would be mainly supported by the consulting team, but it's important for you to be aware that that doesn't mean you wouldn't have access to the global industry team, or certainly the social impacts coach that we have specifically within my team. So you would probably end up speaking to both, I would say, but primarily, certainly in impact consulting, a lot of what the consulting team do is going to be really effective there. That's not to say you wouldn't be speaking to others within the team as well. And then I'll keep going just a little bit more to build out on product management. So with just to bring the roadmap to life a bit, I mentioned, we're building a community there. So, I won't go back over that again. That's growing all of the time. We've got a wonderful kind of broad spectrum of alumni who do product management in tech, in automotive, in FMCG, and so on. And they're all giving individual perspectives about what product management looks like for their sector. So we have a very active Slack channel, for one example, where that's where the community is based. That's where people can ask questions and speak directly to product managers who are in the field at the moment or have been before. But then throughout the year, we run a number of different events. So for example, there's a SQL workshop taking place during the MBA that helps people become proficient in writing and understanding SQL code. And you can go from zero knowledge of what SQL even is to proficient off the back of that specialist workshop as a standalone event. So it's great to have. We're really excited that we have that offered to current MBAs. And then we have other events like competitions where participating students get great exposure to senior level executives and product managers as part of activities, and therefore they can expand their network really effectively, get seen by potential hiring managers and understand the space a bit more. So hopefully that gives you a bit more flavor. So I'm going to move on to the next question around transitioning from social impact to impact consulting. So obviously this is not my personal area of expertise. I would say along the way you will get the chance to speak to our consulting team, and actually they'd happily take direct questions as well if you can get access to them. My initial view is that yes, I would say most transitions are possible with, with a really dedicated approach in terms of leveraging networks effectively, being really aware of what's feasible and what isn't. Nothing's necessarily off the table. And it's about understanding that space and where your skills can pivot accordingly. For me, it feels like impact to impact consulting makes sense. And there's obviously going to be experience that can translate well there. So that would be something we would be very much talking with you about as part of, pre-MBA, during MBA, no problem there. So on to the next question from Rumby about doing an internship in the summer for investment banking. I guess maybe it depends on which summer we're talking about. So on this one, the summer before you start your MBA, I guess, is the much more grey area, in that it wouldn't be part of the MBA, it wouldn't be accredited internship. And obviously with it being the summer before the MBA, it's hard for that to lead into a full-time opportunity when actually you're not going to be available till post-MBA a year plus down the line. So pre-MBA internships, I think it's a great talking point, where those are very much student-led, and they can be really useful for people where they can set them up to get some industry experience with their next move in mind. But usually pre-MBA internships are never really then tied to anything longer term. Then the summer during the MBA, so you've started in September, the following summer, that's where investment banking internships more often take place. So that's when you would be more likely to do it. And I'll move on to the next question. Okay, yeah, I like this question around number of years experience and whether the approach would change. I would say it depends is the high level answer on that one. So I guess there can be differences in approaches, but again, it would depend on what you're trying to do. So this one, we're used to seeing very, very diverse transitions in terms of the number of years experience, right? So I've worked with many MBAs who've got 2-3 years experience, but then to the same degree, the same amount of MBAs with 10, 12, 13 years experience. And each journey is going to be different. And I would say at a high level, a lot of the approach would be the same in terms of the importance of networking, kind of being aware of the sector that you're looking to go into and what they look for. But I think ultimately, whilst the extensive experience can kind of work for you and against you depending on what you're trying to do, right? For the most part, I would say it works for you in that you've got more experience to leverage, but actually a lot of the approach will be the same. And we'd be happy to work with you on a basis to support that accordingly. I'm going to move on to the next question. They keep coming, which is great. Just read through. Yeah, okay. So I like Shrey's question as well about looking to move into corporate strategy or M&A roles in big tech. So this is a conversation I'm having live with an MBA who's just graduated at the moment. I think what this would boil down to, Shrey, would be, I think, using a lot of the 2-hour job search methodology. And this applies across the board. So whenever I've been talking about the importance of networking, really it's all being underpinned by the 2-hour job search methodology. I can't speak highly enough of that book and of that approach, especially in today's market. We see it working really well. We see the structure that kind of book and that methodology supports, that it really works. And actually, if you're using that methodology to be clear about, what is it about big tech companies that really appeal, it's going to help you identify which companies within big tech you really want to target and why. It's going to help you build awareness of the alumni network at those organizations, and you can then start reaching out to those people and talking to them. And this applies, I would say, for any sector. So it's not just about Shrey's question. it's talking to the people who work at the organizations that you're interested in that ultimately is going to prove the most useful. So not only is it going to help you figure out if that organization is indeed for you, it's also going to be about the insight that helps you optimize the whole application and assessment process. The thing to be aware of with big tech is that a number of them have structured MBA hiring programs, which are one way in, but they don't always lead directly to a role in corporate strategy. So again, this is about awareness of individual programs and roles available. And sometimes it might be better to make a kind of a stepping stone move into a big tech company, into a role that better leverages your role, your functional and industry experience, with a view to moving into corporate strategy from the inside. So I often see MBAs, it's much more efficient for them to get into the organization when they're going for a role that more aligns to what they've done before. And then once they're there as an internal talent, it's often easier to move into the highly competitive space that is corporate strategy. That's the really cool stuff that lots of people want to do, and it can be really hard to get into if you're pivoting your career. So it's just worth being aware of how it works for that organization. I'm going to move on to the next question. I'm going to get slightly worried that I might not be able to cover them all, so I'll maybe try and speed up just a bit as well. Well, hopefully I've kind of talked a bit about 10 years work experience. I would say, the challenges, everyone has challenges with career transition. For someone with 10 years, it can be that a common challenge can be structured MBA programs, structured hiring at big organizations can often not be tailored to someone with a bit more experience. A bit like Amazon had to, they have roles that they know the average MBA can fit into. So it can be harder sometimes for someone with more experience because they're overqualified for some of the roles that are being put in front of them. But actually the advice for overcoming those challenges go back to 2-hour job search and networking, and actually, building that awareness, getting the insight for that organization. How could you potentially identify roles that you are a better fit for, and how you would get to there? So hopefully that makes sense. So Skull Center, I'm not really going to talk about because, the Skull Center will talk much better about what they do. I'll say quickly that Dan Kiernan in my team, who is our Impact Careers coach, he works directly with the Skull Center to kind of understand what they're doing and how he can align the Career Development Center support accordingly. But there's a breadth of support that the Skull Center offer that I wouldn't do justice in a few minutes. So I would say, look to understand directly from the Skull Center about what they do, but be assured that the Career Development Center works with them as well. Similarly, I can't really talk too much about the Impact Investing Bootcamp, I'm afraid. It's not something I get involved in as head of global industries. That's something the finance team deliver. All I will say is that, again, it's broad. So time and time again, we come back to recognizing that careers can be very different. So the support that we offer is as broad as possible while still being, specifically focused on tangible skills. Again, you'll hopefully get the chance to speak to someone in the finance careers team further down the line to understand that a bit more, or even talking to, I would say, an alumni of the school who went through the Impact Investing Bootcamp and get their perspective on how they found it. We keep rattling through. So on to ex-army. So yes, I think, military careers in general, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. That there's usually some every year. And actually, what's quite exciting is that this year, two of the MBAs have set up military careers club, which is the first time we've had one. And they're just in the process of building out, relationships around the school. So there are plenty of organizations interested in ex-military talent. But also, again, we recognize that ex-military forge very different careers as well. So there is support, and I would say that's something we can absolutely talk about as part of your career support once you know that you're doing your MBA with us. So percent of grads going into tech take up PM roles. This is going to be a bit of a stab in the dark. I would say, in fact, I'm not going to put a number to it, I'll be honest with you. It's not something I would say to necessarily measure from your perspective about thinking about what's going to work for you. I would say there is a significant proportion of students moving into product management, and that's why we've set up the product management roadmap. But I would say it doesn't matter whether it's 10% or 40%, it'll probably be somewhere in between. Actually, your journey into product management will be unique, and it's about you understanding the various parts of the product management roadmap that's best placed to support you based on your own individual experience. So visas for internships and job opportunities. So actually, it's a quick answer that for internships as an Oxford MBA, if you're a non-EU resident, your student visa covers you doing an internship typically. So there's no issue there. Obviously, then there is a broader impact in the current job market about full-time job opportunities because there are a lot of organizations struggling, kind of slowing down hiring, and therefore it becomes more difficult for them to necessarily sponsor visas. If we go back to the circles of influence and control, obviously this is not something that really any of us, whether it's career development centre or students, can influence or control, but it's something you can be aware of. So this points back to the value of networking, being aware of which organisations are sponsoring visas, using the 2-hour job search methodology, leveraging the network and the alumni pool to best optimise your own position for your target organisation, I would say. Career support for spouses is not something that is formally offered. Obviously, we are dedicated to MBA support, and obviously when it comes to spouses, I would say then it becomes even more broad, because we don't even have then the common ground of the MBA to design and build a lot of support. I would say I've seen it happen ad hoc accordingly, depending on the individual circumstance, but it's certainly nothing formalized. Then to Andreas's question around big tech platforms, I love a closed question. Yes, we have experience of placing candidates into those companies, and they form into global industries typically, and we're constantly building out the relationships with these organizations. So they're very much at the forefront of a lot of the proactive activity that we do. So Kingston, I'm going to skip over your question because it's not careers related. Obviously, we don't influence the intake or the application fees. So pardon me, I'm going to move over that one, especially in the interest of time. Please do speak to the recruitment team about that. Yes, Andreas, there is a scheme to work with mentors is an interesting word, actually. So I suppose it depends what you mean by mentors. Our industry advisors are mentors in some capacity, in that they are mentoring students on individual journeys. But we also have an executive coaching scheme within the Career Development Centre that is also essentially mentorship as well. So you'll be ably supported in that space, no problem. So then to Fahim's question around, I guess moving into impact, I suppose this comes back to a lot of what I've been saying, in that each career is different, but I would say if you've got a kind of a non-mainstream background, but you're looking to do something that you're passionate about, that's where you can channel a lot of your energy, is to then kind of really get into that space, into that network, and speak to people who will have done a similar journey. But I would say people who move into social impact as a broad sector have come from any background you can think of, so it's always possible. biotech, to Hannah's question around biotech and smaller pharmaceuticals. So yes, the healthcare sector is vibrant. It's recognized by us as a very active sector, and we have communities building there. So we have healthcare clubs every year. We have events happening in that space, and certainly the smaller ones are part of that. Oxford obviously itself as a destination has a rich network of biotech organizations. That's something we recognize. So I would say there is a network there for you to tap into for sure. I'll keep going. The questions keep coming. I would ask that I'm probably not going to get to all of the questions now, so please don't add any more in, because the ones at the bottom I just won't get to, but I'll do my best for the ones that are here. Further educational opportunities. So Martin, that feels like, again, not necessarily a careers related question, because we focus on career transitions and the job market. So I suppose for education, then that's by definition not necessarily a career, unless you're looking to forge a career in the education space, in which case we would be able to have a conversation there. But I guess otherwise it's for you, if you're looking about doing more further education, then you're part of the Oxford network, having done your MBA here. So you will be able to explore that for sure. So to Weldon's question around structured recruiting for internships. No, is the quick answer there. Not, I would say, internships form part of recruitment, structured recruitment for financial services and consulting, but they're by no means the majority. So each of those sectors, both finance and consulting, see the majority of people go through the direct kind of lateral hire route. Structured hiring, it does vary a bit each year, and internships vary a bit each year. Don't worry about it being the most or the least or the middle. You've got to work out what works right for you based on your experience and on what you're looking to do. On to Nancy's question. Okay, Mansi, I think in the interest of time, I would say I'm not going to get into giving you my thoughts on your plan here and now. What I would say is I think you're thinking about the right things. I think you've got the start of a plan that makes sense. So well done for thinking about it like that. And I would say keep that thinking in mind and kind of keep the conversation going. So I guess then to Gareth's question around changes brought by COVID, ultimately with this one, it comes back to individual companies. They've all been impacted in different ways. I would say at a top line, I guess the main thing that we've seen happen across the board is interviews have gone online, where recruitment processes have continued for obvious reasons. So a lot of our support kind of adjusted to that and recognized that and adapted to that. So we've been supporting the outgoing MBAs very closely on digital interviewing, digital networking, everything that kind of based around a virtual setting. So Shrey, I'm going to skip over your question, I'm afraid, because I would be probably taking up too much time to go into that. I would point back to a lot of what we say, where career paths in those spaces absolutely can happen. Depends on your own background, but we have multiple teams kind of touching on that space, and that's something we're kind of really proud of. So we'll be able to have that specific conversation going forward. So then to Ferte about having 7 months time prior to the MBA. Great. I would say yes, there's loads of you that you can do to explore a career in product management. And actually, a lot of the support starts, I would say, months in advance of the MBA. So there'll be structured support, but also I would guess, that there would be potentially a one-to-one conversation there to have. But it's great that you're thinking about leveraging your time accordingly. I'm going to just take a moment to breathe because I can see that we're at 12 o'clock. Megan, I'm okay to run over by a few minutes, but by all means, step in and stop me talking if you need to officially close. Otherwise,
Yeah. No, if you're happy, Tom, to continue, then that's absolutely fine. We'll be sending the recording out. So if anyone needs to leave, they can catch the end of it. We'll be sending an email with the recording.
Okay, cool. Well, look, I will need to draw a line in the sand in about 5 minutes. So I'll get through what's remaining as best as I can. So next question. Okay, that's a question for, I would say, the recruitment team about whether you qualify to apply or not. That's not a Career Development Centre question, so I'm going to skip over that top one. Career team support for digital consulting. So, Yang, this is an interesting question, I guess. Digital consulting, I'm presuming we're talking as an example, someone like BCG Digital Ventures, where it spans both teams ultimately. So there'll be elements of the consulting development team's work that supports you in that, but there'll potentially be work within global industries. I would say primarily, if it's got the word consulting in it, primarily it will be the consulting development team, but we're not too rigid about that. You know, where appropriate, if there's support from another team because of the networks that we've got, then that's there as well. So to the question around how many years an international student can stay in the UK post MBA. So obviously I'm not a qualified visa expert, but off the top of my head with that one, I think it's about 2 years, but please don't hold me to that. You know, you would have to get the official guidance on that, and that may change, of course, in between now and next year. But at the moment, I think it's about 2 years. The percentage of previous MBA alumni's career location. Wow, that's a really broad question, Pack. I'm not, I would say, you know, the employment report that gets published every year, and there is a fresh one that's been out a month or so now. So the latest one is available for you to see all of the different regions and which percentage of students go where. Okay, and thanks, Umut, for the honesty about joining late, no problem. On-campus recruiting. So this is an interesting one. You know, as things stand, on-campus recruitment doesn't happen in a physical sense. You know, it's on, basically organizations are doing their recruitment virtually still. That's what we're seeing. Obviously in a year, in 2 years time, then actually it'll probably be different. But just for some context, I guess, on-campus recruitment can look like many different things, and we're really flexible with that. So at the moment, you know, for the incoming MBAs, that looks like a mix of different types of online events. So I would say big organizations are still engaging with us, and they still want to hire Oxford MBAs, and we're just working with them directly to make it work for whatever's best for them. So Mansi, I'm going to point you to the employment report as well for that one. I would say, again, don't get too drawn in on what the numbers of what people have done before, in that you know, the employment landscape changes every year, and you know, you've got to forge a career based on what you want to do, and based on the networking that you do and the insight that you get. And we're getting there. So to Jonathan. Okay, so again, hands up. I'm not an expert in finance careers. You will be able to speak to finance careers team at some point as part of this process, Jonathan. I would say, do you know what? I'm not going to speculate. I think, you know, each year it changes from what I see, and that you've got to kind of take the latest view based on the appropriate time for you. So if we're talking about internships for, you know, summer 22, there's a lot that can happen between now and then. So I would say, you know, start exploring this and start building your network, and you'll start to build the picture as it evolves. And to Yavendra's final question, internships can be part-time. They can also be full-time, and it depends on the individual organization. So with that one, you know, it depends, and we've seen especially a bit more flexibility for this summer just gone. Some people have been doing a part-time internship, but people have been doing full-time ones as well. And I can breathe. So we got through them all. Thank you for bearing with me and for listening to me. Hope you found that useful. Feel free to reach out to me directly on LinkedIn if you wish. Just make sure you spell my name right, because there is another Tom Lawrence who works for the school, Professor Tom Lawrence. So don't invite him, because he won't know why. But I'm very happy to hear from you. Thanks for listening to me, and I look forward to working with you in the future.